Hello, everyone. It's 2 o'clock, and I was told to be on the dot, so here we go. If everybody could just slowly take their seats, and we'll start today's first thematic track session on energy infrastructure resilience. So we're going to be talking about this, and for those of you who also followed the opening plenary, there was a lot of discussion about resilience. I think we can all agree with the disruptions we're seeing both politically and in terms of natural disasters, and all of our thoughts and prayers with the Philippines, the people of the Philippines who experienced an earthquake yesterday. Energy resilience is key, and fundamentally it's why I love my job in energy, is because it's just not just energy. If energy doesn't function, the real economy doesn't function. If the real economy doesn't function, people don't have livelihoods. So in that way, it all very much ties together, both in kind of the just strand, the economic development strand, but certainly also social development. Today, we're talking about energy resilience from a power sector perspective. Energy resilience means many things, but we're talking about it from a power sector perspective. And we are seeing both disruptions in supply chains, disruptions from weather events, and also, as we've heard in the plenary session, increasing growing demand put a lot of strain on the power sector in Asia Pacific and around the world. So what we're going to hear here today is, first we're going to start with presentations from our 4 panelists, where we will hear about power sector resilience, both from a perspective of ASEAN, from perspective of UK. We're also going to hear about it from some technologies perspective, from hydro and offshore wind. And this will all tie together for us to have a moderated discussion afterwards. Now, I would love for everybody, if you're thinking about questions afterwards, we do have microphones to ask them directly. If you're not comfortable with that, please do put them in the app, and we can see how much we can get to. But we will try to make it as interactive as possible. So to start with our presentations, I would love to invite Yin Yong Long, Director of Sustainability Studies at United Nations Sustainability Solutions Network, that was a long one, to the stage for her presentation. Please welcome Yin Yong.
Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yuan Yong. The Integrated Resilience Assessment of the Decarbonized ASEAN Power Sector work that I'm bringing to you today comes from the ASEAN Green Future Project. We have modeled 4 scenarios. Scenario 1, S1, it's a national isolation scenario, meaning that cross-border transmission has been capped at the 2026 levels. And each country pursues its own decarbonization. There is no cross-border optimization of generation, capacity, or transmission. S2, that is a moderate regional interconnection. That is where we model the 18 priority links defined in the ASEAN Integrated Master Plan Study AIMS 3, plus 2 more recently proposed interconnections, which is from Vietnam and Cambodia to Singapore, plus from Kalimantan to Sulawesi and Papua. S3, that is where we treat ASEAN as a copper plate, where there is unconstrained resource sharing. And this is what we call the technical least cost optimization. S3+, that is where we apply a fossil fuel ban by 2050 on S3 and see how it behaves without the option of choosing fossil fuels. So, what is the isolation penalty that countries play when they operate on the basis of possessive national sovereignty? See, in S1, the cost is severe. With cross-border transmission frozen at 2026 levels, countries must maintain massive redundant capacity for local self-sufficiency. And that means 102 gigawatts of coal and 172 gigawatts of natural gas still operating in 2050. And worse, because they cannot share power across borders during localized mismatches between supply and demand, the region wastes 27.3% of its potential clean energy production. And that is 932 terawatt hours of clean electricity generated but discarded annually. So, the isolation penalty is not just higher cost, but systematic waste of decarbonization investment. In S3, which is under the full regional integration, we see outstanding efficiency dividends. The region meets its power needs with 966 gigawatts of capacity versus 1,473 gigawatts under isolation. That is 507 gigawatt less of hardware. And generation actually rises from 3318 to 3547 terawatt hours. That is more energy with nearly 35% less infrastructure. And required storage also plummets from 128 gigawatts to 45 gigawatts. That's a 65% reduction. Under S3+, which is the fossil ban scenario, natural gas is eliminated, and the model selects clean hydrogen as the primary regional energy currency. So we have 218 gigawatts, generating 35% of the mix by 2050. And hydrogen's role changes fundamentally between these two pathways. In S3, it reaches a massive 253 gigawatts, but it is just a market-driven backup fuel, coexisting alongside a heavy 679 terawatt hours of gas. The old fossil scaffolding remains intact. In S3+, hydrogen capacity slightly drops to 218 gigawatts, but it becomes a true structural backbone. Now, with fossil fuels completely banned, hydrogen acts as the essential glue holding together a near-zero emissions grid, pairing with 775 terawatt hours of firm hydro and geothermal over a massive 38.5 gigawatts of regional grid. The distinction here is not capacity, but systemic dependency. A technology becomes a structural backbone only when the rest of the grid relies on it to survive. S3+ forces that dependency, whilst S3 avoids it. Our modeling also reveals a sharp divergence between political aspiration and technical efficiency. Current policies prioritize high visibility prestige infrastructure, like the proposed subsea cables from Cambodia and Vietnam directly to Singapore. Our optimization model rejects these routes because the subsea premium is punishing. While standard overland lines cost roughly $300 per kilowatt, deep maritime corridors jump 4.5 times to $1,350 per kilowatt. Instead, the most efficient pathway reinforces the mainland backbone, that is Thailand to Peninsular Malaysia, expanding to 7.5 gigawatts, Thailand to Cambodia to 6.6 gigawatts. Thailand becomes the grand central station of mainland ASEAN, with over 16 gigawatts of bidirectional capacity connecting with 5 neighbors by 2050. The only major subsea exception that the model accepts is Sabah to Philippines, climbing to 7.1 gigawatts by 2035. This slide highlights what I call the sovereignty trap. By maintaining grid borders and inflexible bilateral contracts, ASEAN leaves half of the grid's potential of integration benefits on the table. And we prove this by tracking renewable curtailment. Moving from the national isolation in S1 to full integration in S3, that drops regional curtailment by 26%. However, our current policy-led S2 only captures 13% of that drop. In short, current policy is a halfway house that traps 50% of our clean energy benefits at the border. This chart shows that market integration is not a climate strategy on its own. In the least cost technical optimum, look at S3, as emissions are far higher than the policy-led S2. Why? That's because connectivity optimizes asset utilization, but does not guarantee greening. Without a carbon price, an integrated grid will ruthlessly optimize the cheapest balancing tool available, which is gas. This highlights the capital efficiency of the ASEAN power grid, but draws a sharp line between mere grid efficiency and true decarbonization. Interconnectors alone cannot break the inertia of fossil fuels. Integration must be paired with carbon pricing or hard asset bans. Ladies and gentlemen, whilst we haven't subjected our regional model to a 3 times gas price shock compounded with a 50% gas supply cutoff, we have done that with the Malaysia model. The results validate that deep decarbonization is a national security strategy. In 2050, the business as usual gas-dependent pathway collapses under the shock. That triggers a 93% surge in electricity cost and 45 terawatt hours of unserved load. That is 10% of Malaysia's national demand. Conversely, the ambitious decarbonized pathway achieves total sovereign immunity with 0 cost increases and 0 blackouts. However, immunity is not linear. In the midterm, the accelerated decarbonization pathway plunges into a valley of vulnerability. Because coal is retiring and gas is being reduced, but renewables have not yet reached its critical mass, so mid-transition risks temporarily exceed the baseline. The policy takeaway here is clear. The states must actively manage this valley of vulnerability. Fossil subsidies purchase temporary price stability, but not resilience. We must guide the transition through this midterm vulnerability using strategic reserves, demand response, and regional interconnection. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and back to you, Randy.
Thank you so much, In-Young. And I think there's a great segue here, because what we just heard about was modeling of what ASEAN's future could look like. And I think we can recognize that all countries are on their own pathways. Some are a little bit farther ahead on some of the integration investments, while others are thinking of them now. So it is my real pleasure to now hand the presentation over to Sarah Love, who's our Regional Director for Climate for the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. She will tell us about the UK story, which is a little bit further ahead, but definitely, I'm sure, faces some of the same considerations. Sarah.
Great. So good afternoon, everybody. Really pleased to be here today. So we can think about different aspects of resilience. I'm sort of taking a little step back now in terms of just setting the scene in terms of how we think about resilience. So we can think about resilience in terms of resilience to geopolitical developments, so exposure to fossil fuel price spikes that we're all living through currently. We can think about flexibility, so how we're able to dynamically balance demand and supply in the system. We can think about the software, so how do we operate the system? How can we recover quickly from outages and shocks when they happen? And we can think about the hardware, so the physical infrastructure and how resilient that is to shocks. For example, climate impacts, but earthquakes and other shocks as well. And then also digital resilience, so data visibility, cybersecurity all falls into that category. But ultimately what we're talking about here is how we're able to operate a system to keep delivering reliable, affordable energy to businesses, to households, and to respond quickly when shocks happen. So in the next 7 minutes, a little bit more than that, I will cover off some of these areas. So talk about how the UK is thinking about reducing our geopolitical exposure, how we are using flexibility to get there, how we're approaching the kind of software question and the hardware question, and I'll talk about sort of parallels to ASEAN while we can. So in the UK, over the last decade or so, we've shifted from dispatchable, synchronous combustion generation to a mix of variable renewable resources. And we've gone from 40% coal in 2012 to zero coal in just over a decade. And in doing so, and in sort of going through this transition process, we have strengthened our resilience in some ways. We've diversified our fuel mix, the technologies, the location of generation. But at the same time, we've made life harder for ourselves because the time that we need to respond to sort of managing the grid is we need to react much faster. We need to fine tune. We've basically made our operations that bit more complicated. And now we're aiming to go even further. So we've set a target of ourselves in the UK to virtually completely decarbonise our power sector by 2030. So in the next 4 years, we'll go from around 65% low carbon energy sources to nearly 100%. And this chart shows how we plan to get there, which is effectively tripling our offshore wind and our solar capacity, doubling our onshore wind capacity. And flexibility is really the way we're going to get there. So we're having to pretty much rewire the system in the UK to be able to handle more intermittent renewables in the system. And we're looking at flexibility both on the demand side, but also on the supply side. So on the demand side, we're looking to triple demand flexibility within the system, and that means deploying measures that enable electricity customers to, both on the industrial side and the domestic side, to reduce their energy usage at peak times when the grid's under most stress. And our National Energy Systems Operator, NESO, is doing this through incentivising flexible demand through tariffs, and in fact they are paying people to reduce their demand during peak periods under their demand flexibility service. They're also looking at increasing penetration of smart meters and using smart technologies to automate peak time adjustments. And then on the supply side, there's kind of two big areas that we're focusing on. So short-term battery storage, but also scaling interconnector capacity. So really interesting to hear the modelling just now. And we have a long track record of trading electricity with our European neighbours in the UK, and the benefits that has brought us. And so being able to share some of those lessons with the Southeast Asia region in light of ASEAN Power Grid is hopefully very useful. And on the supply side as well, we're also looking at more innovative technologies, so compressed air storage as long duration energy storage, alongside pumped hydro and batteries as well. And retaining some flexibility, a small amount through gas and CCS. But together, this is the toolkit that we are looking to use to create a flexible, low carbon and resilient energy system. So as I mentioned, these shifts do place additional pressure on systems operation. And our UK approach to systems management focuses on the concept of operability. So, how can we operate the electricity system safely, securely, and at lowest cost? So our National Energy Systems Operator, NESO, they think about operability across a range of different scenarios that they face. So that includes different generation mixes, different levels and profiles of demand, also different power outage scenarios as well. And they look at 7 different areas of operability. So frequency, so ensuring grid frequency stays within acceptable ranges, similarly voltage, making sure that the system has enough inertia to remain stable, thinking about thermal operability, so ensuring thermal constraints don't prevent delivery of energy. They think about within-day flexibility, so making sure we're able to balance demand and supply within the system, and that includes some of those demand-side measures that I mentioned just a second ago. Importantly, restoration, so how do you recover from power outages within defined regulated sort of timeframes? And then adequacy, so making sure that there's a very high probability that supply meets demand within the system. So all of these areas become a little bit more complicated with increased renewable energy penetration, but entirely manageable. And the way NESO manage the system is through different sets of technologies. So that's things like grid forming technologies, synchronous condensers, batteries alongside the demand side management mentioned earlier, at the same time as securing capacity through the capacity market. And I think the key point here is that, on this sort of software side, it's not just a technical question. This is absolutely about about the right policy measures, about having the kind of commercial mechanisms and the human factors. This is a system that needs to be operated by people, so making sure that the human factors are also considered is really important. And then finally, I just wanted to say a word about the sort of hardware, so the physical infrastructure, and particularly focusing on climate risks and resilience in that sense. So the key risks in the UK are, sometimes, actually quite similar to risks that are faced in this region. So flooding, extreme weather events, so, often high winds in the UK, but also extreme heat and cold as well. And I think key for us has been to think about, how do you build resilience in from the start as a core design principle and not as something that you, retrofit later. And also how we think about system-level resilience, so including kind of interdependencies and cascading risks that might happen. So, for example, a couple of years ago in the UK, there was a big storm that knocked out part of the power system, but also water treatment facilities as well. And you can think about how impacts on transport and communication can also hinder the response. So taking that kind of whole-of-system approach is important in this context as well. And we have something called the National Preparedness Commission, which is a partnership with Imperial College London that helps the UK think about systems resilience. So there's a couple of options here for enhancing resilience, so thinking about infrastructure upgrades, so that could include replacement of assets, use of redundancy, but also a key role for standards and certification here too. We can think about network monitoring, so how we identify and quantify the risk. Also really important for making the case for investment, investing upfront to avoid losses later, and demand flexibility as well is really relevant here. But the point perhaps to end on, I think, is it's also really important not just to think about physical infrastructure. Again, it's the kind of people element as well. So, organizational capability, particularly to respond to shocks. So, when we think about emergency response, it's also about the kind of planning and preparedness. So how do you do the stress testing, using forecasts, using data? How are you prioritizing the most vulnerable so that when these shocks do occur, that we're able to respond quickly and effectively and in a targeted way, coordinating across the multiple different actors that are relevant. And then how do we learn and recover afterwards? So there are a few cross-cutting issues here, including the importance of climate risk modelling, of data, with potential for AI and new technologies to be really relevant here as well. But I will stop there, and hopefully that prompts some further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a lot to think about from both, the policy aspects to the physical infrastructure. And I think one thing that this brought to mind for me is two things actually. The first thing is, I think this is great that we're having this conversation here at ADB, because it is very important to also think about how do you then plan your financing strategies and your capital deployment to make sure that you're taking a little bit more long-term decisions rather than the short-term ones, because there can be differences in costs and depending on what you're spending up front versus what you might spend down the line, recovering and setting back your energy infrastructure if something happens. The second thing, and this brings me to our next presentation, is when you look at this, it feels like a lot. There's so much to take into account, and how do you start to eat an elephant? You start piece by piece. So this is why I want to bring on our next presenter, Jinglong Ma, who's Vice President of APAC Sustainable Development Center at Jinyang University, to talk about how you integrate in a resilient way offshore wind. Jinglong Ma.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I'm Jinglong Ma. I'm from the organization called APAC Sustainable Energy Center, based in Tianjin. It's also as a faculty member of Tianjin University. The presentation is about the support green integration of offshore wind. And this is based on a part of the work we did for State Grid and a part of the work we did for APAC Energy Working Group. And the focus will be on from the power grid perspective and how to integrate offshore wind to the grid. The conversation, the talk will be basically three parts. The first thing I want to give a general overview of offshore wind development in China. And secondly, with a case study of Jiangsu province, talking about practice and experience of Jiangsu province. I talk a little more on Jiangsu, and with an end of a summary and recommendation. From this diagram, we can see actually the development of offshore wind in China is very much show a kind of very good learning practice with a very sharp learning curve. And the offshore wind actually start from UK and other European countries, Germany included, and Nordic countries as well. And in the early 2010s, there's basically is a learning and new technology from Europe in the early 2010s. And at that time, there's a concession process, government set price for the offshore wind. And in the mid of 2010s, there's a change from the government support to gradually to the free market price setting process. And there's a couple of milestones. Basically, by 2019, all the new installation of offshore wind, the government subsidies has been removed for the new project. And the subsidy officially phase out by 2021. So you can see from this diagram, in 2021, there's a big jump of installation of 17 gigawatt in new installation capacity. And after 2022, and the offshore wind go to the grid parity, everything go to the market competition. So that, and from this diagram, we can see also there's a deep learning curve. By the end of 2025, the total installed capacity of offshore wind in China is 47 gig. And global-wise, it's account about half of global installation by 2025. As I mentioned briefly, basically, there's compare with the plan of development. China have a 5-year plan, and all this chart table just a summary of what's going on in the last 5 years plan, which is 14 from 2021 to 25, and the next one from this year to 2030. If in a very key point is a strategic development from near shore to far shore to deep water, and from last 5 years to next 5 years. And on the other hand, there's a moving, moving from the over last 5 planning period, build up a national and regional industry base and supply chain over past 10 years, particularly past 5 years, and then move to deploy the new technology in the deep water and far sea. And in terms of capacity, as I mentioned, by end of 2025, there's 47 gig installed. For the next 5 years, the planned capacity of new installation will be over 100 gigawatt by 2030, which means around 15 to 20 gig annually. Another thing is, I would like to point out, in terms of the location of the project. And over the previous 10 years, and development have been mostly focused on the near shore, which closed in the province of along the coastline. And for the next 5 years or further, the focus will be on the deep sea along all the sea area. And if you know the geographic situation, it will be the 4 seas, Bohai, Yellow, and East, and South China. Another thing is I would like to mention is the technology development. And the key point focus on from the near shore to far shore, and also we be focused on floating solar, floating offshore wind. And capacity-wise, the new capacity, unit capacity will be more than on R&D and development and manufacture over 20 meg per unit. That's one of the direction of the next 5 years. I'm looking the time. Jiangsu is one of the province on the east coastline. From this diagram, we can see, and basically with a population of 85 million, and economic-wise is similar with South Korea. This is some number of GDP. USD is 1.9 trillion. The install capacity, talking about the power network and the system, install capacity in Jiangsu by 2025 is 245 or 246 gigawatt, which is similar with Germany. So that's the situation of Jiangsu province. In terms of power grid, Jiangsu has a relatively good transmission network or backbone, if you like, with 1,000 kV, 1,000 kV AC and 800 kilowatt DC, and also very good. Basically, it's 7 vertical and 7 horizontal 500 AC line, and 220 AC line cover the entire province. The strategy of Jiangsu in terms of offshore wind is in line with the national policy. I'll not look into detail. Basically, the challenge is location. All the renewable resources and the conventional resources in Jiangsu is located on the north part of the province. And the load consumption, majority of consumption is in the south part of Jiangsu. That's one thing. Another challenge is faced by all the renewables, such as intermittent nature of renewable. And another thing I would like to see is there's a need for the transmission to take the offshore wind resources to the grid. The last one, not least, is there's a strong requirement for enhance the power network, inland network, because integration of renewable is not only for the connection. Yeah, there's a different connection strategy. Take the power from the wind farm to the grid. I'll not look at more, talk about much more, and any question we can talk later for details. In terms of technology, I just emphasize one thing. There's two different technology. Traditionally, AC technology, and now, and as for HVDC, the new technology has been developed in Germany, but has been matured for the VSC HVDC transmission on the second line of the diagram, which has been the first VSC HVDC transmission line has been installed, which is 400 kV DC line in one of the projects, in Rudong project, transfer the power from the shore to the grid, which is the first in Asia region. And one more point I would like to mention is based on that project and international standard, IEC standard has been developed based on this project, has been issued, the standard issued in a couple of months ago in March or April this year. Yeah, I'm looking at the time. Different technology has been planned and undertaken, deployed for the connection of offshore wind to the grid, from point to point, from the group to the grid, and from the cluster to the grid, and meaning to increase the transmission capacity in different configuration of transmission, from 800 to 1.4 gig, and in the last, if you talk about the cluster approach, could take the 1.5 gig offshore wind to the grid, or 2.4 gig. Give up very quickly. I know time is a concern. To elevate the network bottom line, there's one you can call it innovation to transfer the existing AC line to DC line. A project has been completed by 2024, the first phase. There's to transfer the three-phase AC line to the DC line. The first phase, first stage of the project has been completed by 2024. After this completion, for the transmission line, DC line, the capacity could reach to 3.6 gigawatt. Detailed can be discussed by construction of two converter centers on the two ends of transmission corridor in the two cities of two suburbs, if you like, of Jiangsu. One is Yangzhou, and one is Zhenjiang, as shown in this diagram. Yes, by doing this conversion from the AC line to DC line, the entire network, one of the options is to enhance the backbone of the network. And this is called, the people in Jiangsu Power Grid call it the embedded DC line. Embedded DC on the AC network. So the final target is conversion of the three existing two DC line to AC. So there's an additional two increased capacity of transmission for the power grid across the Yangtze River. Yeah, one more point. The north and the south of Jiangsu, I referred, is divided by the Yangtze River. Besides these two lines, conversion from DC to AC, there's an existing DC transmission with use GI line. GIL is a gas insulation DC line that is transmitted for 4 gigawatt. By doing this, the capacity take the power across the Yangtze River increase from 24 gig to 33 gig. More detailed can be discussed later. One of the last point, I've not used too much time. Innovation. The innovation to me is always the It's not an enabler, it's a driver of energy transition and also for improve the resilience of the power system and the energy system as well. I mentioned 3 innovations as example happened in Jiangsu. One of the, of course, is not entirely new, but has been used in different places. But for offshore wind, there's a grid forming converter that has been installed for on one of the offshore wind turbine. This happened in Rudong, in one of the projects in Sheyang offshore wind. That means install this grid forming converter to make the wind turbine grid friendly, meaning to provide initial, which one of the colleagues mentioned in the plenary session, to compensate with artificial inertia. So this is very, very much important and allow the turbine to participate in auxiliary service to provide frequency control and voltage control and so on. And second example of innovation is there's a new project. This is kind of a very new innovation, if you like, to install, we call it a renewable grid connection stabilizer, or we can call it a grid forming motor and generator pair for renewable. Basically, to install a set of motor between the grid and the wind turbine. So in between, there's a motor, and then along the installation of motor, there's a flywheel to store the energy. By doing this, there's a separation of renewable and conventional power grid to enhance the stability of the power system. The last one, third one is about there's a it is called industry, university, and research collaboration. I mean, to use the modern digital technology and AI technology on, say, forecast of wind farm wind energy resources, and also to provide simulation to guide the real-time optimization of dispatching. So basically, that's 3 innovations. Briefly, accommodation. A few points in terms of the power grid and innovation and the grid connection perspective in terms of renewable, particularly for offshore wind integration. Integrated resource planning is very much important. I'll not go to detail for the coverage of integrated resource planning. I think in the morning, Brenda also, that director of IEA's energy sector, who mentioned there's a rebirth of integrated resource planning. Yes, that's correct. Integrated resource planning in terms of the offshore wind should consider both other kind of marine resource usage and a kind of collaboration between the development of other infrastructure as well, port, vessel, and also power grid. Another one is talking about the innovative project development to develop the energy hub rather than individual project. And another point I would mention is to effectively use corridor of transmission to make the transmission cost effectively. As I mentioned, yeah. Third point I would like to use is to develop the grid compliances of turbine and by the improvement and upgrade of technical standard, and also a kind of industry norm to make the turbine grid friendly. Innovation, I will not to repeat. The last one I would mention is, which is not mentioned over the talk, is utilize the flexibility resources from conventional generation, which is also the case for in Jiangsu, to make the conventional power generator like coal and gas more flexible. And also, on the other hand, could use demand-side resources to provide flexibility to the power system. All in all, with the aim to enhance the reliability and resilience of the power system and network. And with this, I end my talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jinmeng. I think there are many things to pick up on there, but one very interesting research question or thought experiment comes to mind for me is, how do you create that environment where project planners at the micro level take the macro level considerations into account? Because what we saw in some of the technical diagrams was that the way some offshore wind turbines could be brought ashore was to share a transformer. But how do we make sure that that then is optimal for each and every project owner? I myself am Danish, so I'm from a context that has a lot of offshore wind, has a lot of hydro, and showcases how those two resources actually can work very well together. And looking around a lot of regions, hydro is one of the renewables staples, if you will, that is there across the board, from Central Asia to Southeast Asia to China to Latin America and so on. So with that in mind, and it's energy infrastructure that has been built for many years, so very well known, but in a new context, it's very interesting to see how that can contribute to system resilience as well. So please do help me welcome the last presenter to stage, Dr. Joseph Ulmer, Regional Executive for Asia and Oceania for Andritz Hydro. Joseph.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We all know hydro is sometimes one of the forgotten renewable resources because it has been there all the time. Similar to Andritz, we are now 175 years old and still kicking. Asia's energy risk is not scarcity, you know, we have everything, but it is basically an unfortunate issue of dependency, and dependency on the wrong size and the wrong issues of resources. So I think one of these major issues is we need to reduce exposure of fossil fuels, which we cannot control, and we need to turn indigenous resources into reliable, sustainable, and affordable energy. When you look at the risk profile and the wonderful climate change, what do we see? Warming, river flooding, coastal drought, cyclones. Here on the Ring of Fire, we forgot so much volcanic eruptions and also earthquakes, and my spirit and my grief is with everybody affected in this. And this is what we need to take into account, because solar is a region mass scale resource. Hydro and pump storage is massively able to balance the intermittence. We have, through the issue of this Ring of Fire issue, also an unbelievable amount of geothermal resources, which can deliver clean power. And of course, with the huge coastlines, what we have, of course, offshore wind, which every advanced technology, what my good friend John Lynn just showed us, is a viable indigenous resource. So the issue is, are we going to face this challenge? And what are we going to do to change our infrastructure? And then I think I need to add one more thing, which everybody in reality forgets. This is a watt to charge, but I can generate a megawatt demand on the applications that I run. And when you see this power demand, what we have until 2020-30, this is unprecedented in this region. And I'm here now for 45 years. I can tell you I've never seen a thing like this. And this is not only how we are going to provide electricity. Big question is, how do we find all the water to cool the data centers, which we have. So basically, everybody says we need to have a much more integrated planning. I tell you, in the 80s, everybody says, no, you need to have the market operation. They do the planning because everything what you do central is definitely wrong. Now we integrate this planning again into resource and resilience, and there are very good roadmaps how we can achieve this. And I think we need to do it in a way where we basically integrate not only on a national level, but we really integrate on a regional level. Because within the region, we have everything in abundance. And within the region, we can really, really optimize issues. Of course, when we talk about the power grid, this is also one of the most beloved projects in my life. One of my first projects was the first 500 kV network in Indonesia. This was the first in Asia outside of Japan. And we talk about this now since 42 years. Happened very little. There is a little bit one-way connection between Laos and Vietnam, between Laos and Thailand, a little bit between Singapore and Malaysia, a little bit between Thailand and Malaysia, and of course a bit in Sarawak and to Kalimantan in Indonesia. But a real exchange did not happen, and not because it is not technically not possible, but it was not considered appropriate. And appropriate is a pure political definition. I have not seen the technical appropriate of this. Yeah? But is it possible? For sure it is possible. And thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. We are not only going to have to invest less, with the same amount what we are going to spend, we are going to get much less out of it, much more out of it. And with these savings, for sure, we can basically focus also on affordability, which is very important for our Asian consumers. And now we give you a very good example because we are in Manila. There was no decision nearly for 22 years how to deal with the energy scarcity and integration of solar, wind, and issues in the Philippines. Finally, last year, they made a decision and they got for these GAT projects. And now we have a real string of pump storage, which are underway and already under construction. And the beautiful issue on this, it was an extreme simplified gratification of absorption mechanism of storage. So allowing the penetration of other resources in, which basically took this whole thing up. So I think for sure this model could be a trailblazer for the rest of ASEAN. I give you another example, also very much India. The India solar and wind really boomed off. And when we reached the first 100,000 of solar and 100,000 of wind, the Secretary of the Department of Energy invited for a big session. And during his speech, we had a power failure. So he blamed the hotel very much. And in the evening, of course, the national television interviewed him again. And he was, yes, you see, with all is now renewable and we can do this and we will add not only 100,000 but millions. And then we had a nationwide blackout, which took a few hours to restore. The lessons of this now is that India is building the most number of storage after China. Actually combined 2 times or 3 times what Europe is building, 4 times what America is building, and massively more than South America. So the issues of this is, when I talk about hydro in this, for sure to be in Asia, even we are a 170-year-old turbine manufacturer from Austria, I'm proud to be here in Asia because this is really trend-setting. Because the integration of renewables in a seamless manner with deep storage is beyond any expectation. And this is here, you see a picture of one of our plants, what we have done in Pinapuram in India. And I think the main issue on this is very exciting because the first pumping was in less than 48 months. So also hydro projects can build in time and in speed. And the second issue, what I want to show you, is a very interesting issue of Kidston, which is pump storage in a depleted gold mine, totally off river, and still able to generate 2 times 125 megawatt. So what are my key takeaways in this? I know it's already read, but anyway, after this is only lunch break, not a break, so you have to drink your coffee faster. We need to stick to indigenous renewable resources, including off-river pump storage, hybrid, and whatever is possible. Strategic storage deployment will become increasingly important because this is the key. Pump storage can be an enabler, and accelerated policy approval and alignment between industries, policies, but also each other stakeholders, is the key of success. Because we need to transform this planet to a better place for all of us and for our grandchildren. Thank you.
Very tall. Thank you so much, Joseph. If I can invite every speaker to come on the stage with me, we'll move into the discussion phase. And I think we have about 30 minutes for that, so we should have time to have some good conversations. Thank you so much. I promised you that I would keep an eye on the app, so I am going to keep an eye on the app. I currently see a few questions in here, and before we obviously, as a good moderator, we've prepared some discussion if nothing is organically happening in the room, but I do see one here that is from Pankaj Kumar. Pankaj, are you still in the room? Yes. Do you want to come up and ask your questions? Because I'm not quite sure I understand it, but I do think it's relevant. So I know it's for Sarah, and it's related to compliance, risk, and mitigation issues while developing energy infrastructure. But if you could elaborate a little bit on your question, that would be helpful.
Hello. Thank you very much. I'm basically from Nepal. And I like the FCDO presentations regarding how this energy infrastructure develop in UK. And just I query about how you described about the LDCs, least developed country, how to these compliances issues and other risk and mitigations while develop the energy infrastructure in nation. That's my question.
Thank you. So apologies, I can't actually see the question on the app, but as I understand it, your question is around sort of how this might apply to least developed country context,
yes.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly the UK is in a different place from other countries, but I think we've gone through our own journey over the last few decades, and I think clearly this is not like a drag and drop model that we can apply to every context, and Southeast Asia is a very diverse context in itself, with different markets. But I think there are probably some principles that are common that can be applied, to other contexts, and maybe sort of to highlight a few. I mean, I think I talked quite a lot about a whole of system approach, which I think is really important. You can't just look at the supply side. You can't just look at the demand side. You can't just look at the software elements of it. You can't just look at the hardware. You do need to look at a whole of system approach. I think you can do that differently in different contexts, but that principle is really important. I think a second principle, and you touched on it, I think when you're talking about mitigation and compliance and things, I think for the UK context and, increasingly, we're seeing elsewhere the importance of policy and regulation to send the signals to investors and to the market, to get the incentives right for investment, but also from an innovation perspective. I think that the kind of policy and the regulatory context is really important. And we've done some interesting things in the UK on contracts for difference, cap and floor, regulation, which have been useful to bring in some of that investment. They're models that apply to the UK, perhaps not, everywhere, but I think it's a really, useful. We've learned some lessons through that process. And I think maybe just the final principle. I think there's a lot of opportunity to move faster than we've done in the UK. We haven't got everything right, at all. I think that there's a lot of lessons that we've learned from things that haven't gone quite so well. And so there is an opportunity for other countries in the region to not take that same iterative process and to do some kind of leapfrogging and learn some of the lessons from the experience that we've had.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I just I see another question. Go ahead. Yeah.
So many of the presenters have spoken about software, integrated resource planning, etc. What do you think are the main challenges of those software that you have found in the UK or when conducting these analysis in ASEAN? Whether the solutions that are existing are what is needed or further development is required? Thank you.
So I think this actually can be applied across the panel because I think in different ways we're all using software to optimize. So I wonder if we just kind of take that as a starting point to go down the line on the panel, and maybe Jinlong, you want to go first. Thank you.
In terms of software, depends on kind of software. If you refer to the power system analysis, there's an increased trend to incorporate, say, AI in terms of the power system analysis. That is one of the key areas to make this power system analysis more, say, accurate to reflect the situation of renewable. For example, to forecast the renewable production, because as we know, the intermittent nature of renewable, so this is AI could play a very important role to improve the result, the accuracy of forecast, and then turn this data into the real power system simulation model. Another key challenge, of course, is data. Because if we do model, we all know rubbish in will be rubbish out. Besides the forecast, there's a lot of data issue could improve to improve the accuracy of data in terms of generation and also at the same time consumption. Because we all know in the morning mentioned the energy efficiency is called low-hanging fruit, and how to incorporate the energy efficiency issue to improve the overall performance of energy system. Because energy efficiency improvement is another way important, because our session is about energy infrastructure resilience. To manage the demand side effectively actually could have a very good contribution to improve resilience, because demand side is huge resources in terms of to control the demand. We refer another example is also a key challenge is related with data and recent development because of the recent energy crisis in the Middle East. Now there's more and more EV penetration, a strong EV, electric vehicle penetration, as we can see. How can we get all this EV as a part of the power grid? Because we can integrate EV as the resources. This is also about the data issue and how to simulate of the EV's performance charging and utilization and new development. This also involves both modeling and data. So I just announce this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Sarah, I know that from a UK government perspective, you're working quite a lot with your universities as well to make some of this software quite open source. So maybe, and I don't, obviously, if you want to answer this question in a different way, go ahead. But I do think that this is a quite keen link into what we're discussing here.
Yeah, so I mean, I was going to talk about data actually as well, because I think that's been incredibly important aspect to kind of flexibility. So having the data that you need to make those decisions on how to manage demand and supply in the grid is really important. But visibility of data and transparency of data has also been a really important driver of innovation as well. So to touch on the innovation point as well. So the National Energy Systems Operator in the UK has really prioritised data transparency, and in fact it's our regulator and part of the UK system called Innovate UK as well that really kicked this off with an energy data task force. But the kind of presumption is that data will be available and made open. So it's a sort of presumed open approach to data, unless there's a really strong case, not to, whether it's from a security perspective or whatever. But I think, presumed open is definitely the default. And that's created a really kind of competitive space for companies to participate, in the various market mechanisms that we have in the UK. To provide sort of ancillary services as well that help with managing some of these challenges of integrating more renewable energy into the grid. So yeah, absolutely, data would be on my list.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we all know that models are only as good as the data that they're built upon, and AI is great, but fundamentally you need to train them on some data as well. Yin-Yong, you have shown us exactly that type of modeling. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how accessible that software is that you're using, and how do you see that kind of permeating out in terms of governments and so on making their decisions?
The software that we use for this modeling work is Leap and Nemo, and it is very widely accessible. It could be free for the low-income countries, and then it's a tiered fee structure. But the key message here is that software gives us the quantitative numbers, but it does not tell you about institutional governance or the philosophical thinking that is very important for designing energy systems. And the key ingredient to a resilient power system is actually an institutional governance framework where security takes absolute precedence over short-term market optimization. We can build the most advanced interconnected grid in the world, but if our operators, regulators, and leaders do not have the institutional backing to enforce a safety veto when the system is stressed, then all the hardware becomes irrelevant. True resilience is a cultural and behavioral discipline before it is an engineering achievement.
Thank you so much. And Joseph, over to you. I was wondering, when we're talking about pumped hydro, obviously there's a lot of optimization alongside the power system. When you put in your hardware, what are some of these kind of integration software considerations that you take alongside?
Yeah, I think is for sure many of the simulations, what we are going to follow is physics, but the speed how to simulate and do CFD analysis as well as all the issues on 4 quadrants is of course very much software driven. But the key issue, and I think this is today, pump storage and the sizing of it and everything is very much a clear understanding on the confinements and parameters of the business case where it's going to be built. Yeah? So this governance issue, what are the regulations somebody has to follow, come rain, come shine, and these are the things which needs to be basically the base, and only then on this base you can, on top of it, optimize. I think this is the skills, and these are the skills which are not in reality done in software. This is this deep understanding on markets, regulations, governments, bringing economics, finance issues, but also deployment and things together to make a sustainable, affordable, and viable technical solution. Technically, we can nearly do everything. Commercially, we can also do everything. Governments-wise, I think there it's the issue where we need to be very, very careful. And the real issue is to bring this all together for the real stakeholders, the consumers, and the people which we serve with our grids. This is the exercise.
Perfect, thank you so much. I just want to check the audience if there are any more questions. Doesn't look like it, otherwise just signal as we go along. One of the things that I think about when I hear the panel speak and as I hear across resilience, it feels very big and very unmanageable to some extent, because you have to think of everything, and when you think of everything, do you think of nothing? So from my perspective, I sit on the financing side, and one of the very practical advice that I tend to give governments from the get-go is that don't start with talking financing before you know what needs to be financed. And that is that's very easily said, but to do that, there's a lot of practical steps. And I just want to turn to the panel again. I'm going to ask the same question with the panel, and probably start in reverse order with Joseph and then move up the line. From your seat of where you're in the power system and thinking about resilience, what is the one kind of day-to-day, very practical thing that you find yourself keep repeating, and to which stakeholder do you repeat that? And then if there's any kind of magic trick to progressing that, please do also share. Thanks.
I love your statement before. I think it's one of this issue, and I think it's particularly here in ADB, we need to talk about the issue of public-private partnership. These PPP projects, which basically also translate in proper prepared projects. And the thing what we have seen in my career, and I've done a little bit less than 24,000 megawatts on project closure and implementation, is the key is you need to have a proper prepared project. You need to have a very sound business case. What is the aim you want to achieve with your project? Are you going to be in baseload? Are you going into storage? Are you going to work on ancillary services which have total different rates? Do you have to go into very extreme part load issues or whatever? Technically, a lot of things can be done. Second thing is, how can you optimize, particularly on the hydro, the issue between what is my active infrastructure and what is my indirect infrastructure? So what is the optimized access? Yeah, so how many bridges, what weight, what sizes do I have to come to my project site? And they say the next thing is also, what is my optimized evacuation? So where's my next node points for my issue? And then, of course, what is all the hydraulic of the river and the end? So this needs all to be properly prepared, one issue. The next issue is, of course, even more important, is the environmental impact. Yeah? So what kind of sedimentation does the river have? What is the biodiversity? What are the fish migration? What is this? I give you a good example, in the first project on the main Mekong, Xayaburi, where we were the equipment supplier, the Thai developer got the obligation from the Mekong River Commission to build a fish migration for plus minus $250 million in addition to its project cost. And at the time, everybody said it will ruin the project. And we optimized together with the developer and the engineer, whole thing. It's one of the most profitable projects today on the IPP sector, even with such obligations like this. And last week I was in Papua. There we talk very much about landowner issues on hydropower plants and this issue and how you can integrate them. And there is, instead of normal land compensation, you can also make them in the right structure, basically the shareholder of a project, and this would basically secure the income over long term and secure disturbance. Things like this was also done with us, with First Nations in Canada, for resources which before never could be touched. So the issue is, yes, there are either very good projects which always will find financing, whether it's public or private, or there are bad projects, even with the best finance, you cannot make good. So the main issue on all of this is you need to have this whole proper development cycle and tedious work to come to a successful project. And structures and implementation issues now becoming more and more faster because of tools like building integration management end-to-end. But the issue is, it's still basic focus and work, which leads to success.
That's a very good set of advice. Jin-Young, over to you. What's your kind of, what's the most practical advice that you keep giving over and over and over, and to which stakeholder in order to move some of these resilience and integration issues forward?
It has to do with shifting the mindset from treating resilience as a matter of an emergency response protocol into a multi-layered proactive defense system to be designed. And for example, the first line of defense that must be built in is in the engineering physics, and think of that as the x-axis. And that can be done using rapid relay protection and localized storage to isolate a fault within milliseconds to prevent it from cascading. And the second line of defense that could be built in is into our governance rulebook. And you think of that as the y-axis. And that is about using polycentric dispatch and cross-border emergency shedding to preserve system homeostasis when severe multi-fault events happen. And the third line that must be built in, that is on the z-axis, and that is actually regional diplomacy. And that is about establishing the deep institutional trust that is required to create the enabling conditions for pre-engineered intentional splitting of the grid into stable, self-healing islands during a worst-case black sky disaster, rather than letting a localized shock cascade into a regional blackout. Well, ultimately, an interconnected grid, it optimizes capital efficiency, but it also spreads vulnerability. So wires alone are not going to save us. So true resilience requires the convergence of physics, governance, and diplomacy, not siloed solutions. And we must wrap our physical infrastructure inside a multi-layered defense architecture, ensuring that when our physical system is pushed to its limits, the lines of institutional governance continues to hold.
Thank you so much. Sarah?
Thank you. I mean, so I'm an economist, so I always start from the point of view of incentives. You know, where are the incentives to do things? And I talk a lot to sort of other policymakers in the region, and I think, you know, thinking about incentives for investment, but also political incentives, which I think are, you know, really very relevant when we're talking about sort of regional interconnection as well. And sort of on the economic side, you know, the role of carbon pricing and you know, getting the sort of fuel subsidies right is a kind of, you know, key enabler for a lot of this investment to happen. At the same time, incredibly politically challenging. But I think you know, that's an area where, you know, I think there's still room to do a lot more, and there's some good work happening in this region. But I think that the sort of phrase that we use quite a lot is really smart from the start. And again, this is, you know, comes back to the economics of it. You know, if you can build resilience in right from the start, whether it's sort of infrastructure, you know, development, planning, but also on the software side, you know, you can save a lot in the longer run. And I think, you know, in the UK, we have a lot of legacy infrastructure, and, you know, there is a lot of, you know, retrofitting and you know, doing things that, you know, would have been better to have done up front. I think here in this region, given the demand growth, there's a lot of new infrastructure that needs to be built out, and you know, adoption of new technologies to manage this influx of renewable energy into the grid. And so I think there's a really good opportunity to do things, you know, smart from the start, and that's a, you know, a message that that we are relaying, and you know, can support governments in this region, given the lessons that we've learnt in the UK.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think that's a wonderful framing in terms of looking at this high demand growth in the region. Of it can be a little bit scary for resilience, but it can certainly also be an opportunity for resilience and the way you choose to invest now. Jinlong, over to you. What is your kind of most practical perspective and advice you keep giving into WHO in terms of building out resilience?
Thank you. I'm with APAC Sustainable Energy Center, and the good question actually. And from time to time, the issue actually come to me very much. What's the key issue? And both include energy infrastructure resilience and go beyond. If we call it energy transition or even beyond the transition. Interestingly, the current forum is building secure, resilient, and inclusive and intelligent energy system. Traditionally, I mean, WEF, World Energy Forum, right? Coined the phrase energy trilemma: reliability, sustainability, and security of power system. But to me, based on the experience with APAC has 21 economy, of course includes China, and key issue to me, if talking about single out, one issue is long-term policy stability and relevant, stable regulatory framework, which is very much the key to me to facilitate energy transition or beyond transition and improve energy structure resilience. Why? Because energy infrastructure by nature is capital intensive, and also need a long term for construction for literally most energy infrastructure from generation to the power grid. So all those issues need a guidance, clear guidance from government to a certain degree or certain perspective. The improvement of the energy structure, both resilience and move to zero carbon, is to achieve a good public good. This need a good guidance from government, a long-term guidance, because we secured with a clear and transparent long-term policy in terms of energy transition or infrastructure resilience could mobilize to create a condition for private sector investment in this infrastructure. And on the other hand, the clear government policy need to guide design and implement right energy market. Whatever from provide subsidy to set the price and to move to market-oriented situation. So it's all need a clear guidance from the government policy. And the last or not least, I mentioned in my talk is innovation. Very much the situation of the development of energy sector has been led by the technology and the innovation. Start from Europe, we have to give credit to UK and Germany and other European countries with strong vision and strong government support. Start from solar and move to wind, and nowadays there's a good, follow the good guidance, there's a strong development of battery and energy storage is a very good example. All this resulted by a clear government guidance and long-term and transparent. The government just should not decide a policy in one day and change to another in another time. So this is one of the single key point, if like me to single out, is clear and transparent government policy and comprehensive and stable regulatory framework. As for renewable and offshore wind, the clear permitting process is very much important. How to set a clear permitting process so the private sector can move in to develop and for the development of the project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we don't have much time left, so I'm just gonna wrap up a little bit. I think we've had quite a rich and diverse set of perspectives that somehow still converges quite a lot, which is great to see, because I think no matter where we're coming from, we're going to have to be able to speak to stakeholders across the divide in order to solve this problem. And I want to just quote what was said here by you before, Jinyun, that no one can go it alone. And I think that is true irrespective of you're talking about regional collaboration, if you're talking about within national borders, or you're talking within different stakeholders, if you're talking engineer, economists, or policy makers, which can be both, by the way. But I think we need to kind of stick with that message that in a world that seems increasingly complex, the power of the pilot, the power of the collaboration, and the power of understanding each other across the different perspectives will be the only way we're going to create resilient energy systems and resilient, affordable, and sustainable energy systems as well. So with kind of that in mind, in one sentence, and one sentence only from all of you, I personally, when I go out from talks like this, have a tendency to Google something that somebody said. So if I was to go Google the most interesting pilot that you have seen, be it a modeling study, being it an investment, being it a policy development, or a specific project, what would you say? And I have not prepared the panel for this, so please give them a little bit of grace. I'm springing this on them. I'm that type of moderator, like it or not. But which is the most interesting pilot that pops to mind in your mind at the moment for sustainable, affordable, resilient energy systems? Sarah, you look like you're about to speak.
This is a difficult question. I mean, there's so many different interesting kind of innovations, but maybe just to think about the demand side, actually, because I mentioned it in my presentation, we haven't really touched on it. So I think looking at like dynamic pricing and how you can, use that to as an emergency response, but also as a way to bring down costs. And there's been some really innovative work in the UK on that, including with some people who might be here in the audience. I don't know.
Okay, dynamic pricing. Joseph? Any pilot you want people to look at?
I think, well, let's take it very short. I think the thing which drives me is social, technical, and commercial compliance. This is what brings us forward.
Okay. Yinjun?
Okay, instead of giving a current day pilot project, I would like to cite an example of an ancient example, which is the Dujiangyan, which it was built a few thousand years ago in China for flood control and agricultural irrigation, and it did that without a single dam. And until today, it is still serving that province. So I think it's the concept of flow that has been very successfully implemented in ancient China. And I think that principle of enabling flow applies to integrating our modern day flood of renewable energy as well. So our role is actually to improve flow, build channels, rather than building dams to stop the flow of energy.
Brilliant. I love learning from history. We need to remember that. Jinglong, any pilot you want to plug?
In terms of energy, I still think power grid is a key part of energy system. If you use one word or one sentence, is flexibility. Has been mentioned during the presentation. Flexibility could be large scale or significantly improved flexibility of the power system would be the key or one of the most interesting things I would like to look at from generation side and how to improve the performance of generator, and from T&D to make the application of smart grid and intelligent AI technology and other digital technology communication as well. And from demand side, how to incorporate the resource from demand side. This holistic approach to integrate from generation, T&D, demand side, plus energy storage in the whole system would be an approach to improve resilience and flexibility of the power grid or energy system. Maybe this is too long.
Perfect. No, that's perfect. Please, everyone, join me in thanking the brilliant panel here. We have a red light flashing, so that concludes the panel. Thank you. Thank you so much.